Have you ever found yourself stuck, setting big goals, and feeling excited about your future, only to be pulled back into the same old patterns of procrastination, self-doubt, and inaction? You're not alone. In fact, this is a struggle many people face, but here's the thing. The problem isn't that you're lazy or lack motivation, it's something far deeper. In this video, we're going to dive into Carl Jung's groundbreaking concept of the shadow and how it plays a major role in our resistance to change. You see, the shadow isn't just some abstract psychological term, it's a real, powerful force within you, working behind the scenes to keep you stuck. What's even more intriguing is that the bigger your ambitions are, the stronger your shadow grows. But here's the good news. Once you understand the shadow and learn how to confront it, your hidden fears and doubts lose their grip on you. This understanding can be the key to finally making lasting changes in your life, whether it's in your career, health, relationships, or personal growth. The shadow, as Carl Jung explained, is not some evil force, it's simply the part of you that holds unresolved fears, insecurities, and suppressed emotions. And it's always working to protect you, but in ways that keep you trapped in patterns of self-sabotage. Today, I'm going to show you how to bring your shadow into the light and take the steps necessary to move past it. You'll learn why real transformation happens through small, consistent actions, and why the biggest obstacle standing between you and your goals is often your own unconscious resistance. So, if you've ever felt like your goals are just out of reach, if you've struggled to break through the procrastination and fear, then stay with me, because this video could change the way you think about personal growth forever. But before we dive in, I want to remind you to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. If you've been enjoying the content, don't forget to hit the notification bell so you don't miss any new videos. And if you're feeling extra generous, I would love for you to leave a super thanks. It's a great way to support the channel and help me create more content like this. Now, let's dive into how understanding and confronting your shadow can turn your ambitions into real, lasting change. Many people experience a frustrating cycle in which they set big goals and dream about achieving greatness. But despite all their planning and enthusiasm, they often find themselves stuck, repeating the same old habits and feeling like they're getting nowhere. They may call it laziness, a lack of discipline, or just bad luck, but Carl Jung, the famous Swiss psychiatrist, would argue that there's something much deeper at play. Jung believed that the real reason behind this persistent cycle lies in the concept of the shadow. It's not about laziness or a lack of willpower. It's about an unconscious psychological force that is working behind the scenes, preventing them from taking action. This hidden force, the shadow, is both subtle and powerful, and until people confront it, they will continue to be stuck in a never-ending loop of unmet potential. The idea of the shadow is not new, but it is often misunderstood. At its core, the shadow is the part of the mind that holds everything we are unwilling to face about ourselves. It includes our fears, insecurities, and unresolved emotional baggage. All the aspects of ourselves that we try to suppress, ignore, or deny. This part of our psyche operates largely outside of our conscious awareness. And its influence is powerful because it affects our behavior and choices in ways we don't fully understand. For example, when someone procrastinates despite having all the motivation to get something done, it's not simply a matter of laziness, it's the shadow pulling them back, forcing them to avoid discomfort, fear, or uncertainty. Jung's exploration of the shadow offers a framework for understanding why people often sabotage their own success. The shadow, as Jung described it, is not inherently evil. It is simply the part of us that houses the things we are not comfortable acknowledging. This could include our past failures, deep-seated insecurities, or the parts of our personality that we've learned to hide away. The more ambitious a person becomes, the more their shadow grows, because with every new goal and every new risk taken, the shadow feels threatened. Our unconscious mind, through the shadow, tries to keep us safe by preventing us from taking risks or stepping outside of our comfort zone. This internal tug of war between ambition and the shadow can be incredibly difficult to navigate, especially when you don't realize it's happening. Take, for example, a person who wants to start a business. They have the vision, the drive, and the desire to succeed. But every time they take action, they feel paralyzed by doubt. They might tell themselves, "I'm too tired, I don't have the right resources," or "I'll start tomorrow." On the surface, these may seem like excuses, but they're actually defense mechanisms put in place by the shadow to protect the person from the discomfort of uncertainty and failure. The shadow whispers, "It's safer to stay where you are, where nothing changes, than to risk everything for something uncertain." The shadow is not just a passive observer. It actively works to sabotage any change that threatens its control. This is why people can feel motivated one moment, but then fall into inaction the next. They might binge watch motivational videos, set grand goals, and get excited about what's possible, only to find themselves stuck again, unable to take action. Motivation, Jung would argue, is not the solution. Motivation is simply fuel for the shadow's fire. Without acknowledging the underlying resistance within, motivation will only serve to exacerbate feelings of frustration. The cycle of excitement and failure continues because the deeper cause of the problem, the shadow, remains hidden. Consider another example, someone who sets a goal to lose weight. They start with enthusiasm, planning meals, joining the gym, and telling their friends about their new commitment. However, after a few days, they find themselves slipping back into old habits. They might start making excuses. "It's too hard today, I deserve a break," or "I'll try again next week." At first, these excuses may feel like simple lapses in discipline, but in reality, they are the shadow at work, protecting the individual from the discomfort of change. The shadow doesn't want to face the fear of failure, the discomfort of pushing through, or the anxiety of success that might come with a transformed identity. What Jung discovered in his own work with patients is that this pattern of resistance is a fundamental part of the human experience. It's not a sign of weakness, but rather a defense mechanism rooted in past experiences and fears. These unconscious fears drive us to avoid confronting the very things that could bring us the greatest rewards. To break free from this cycle, Jung believed that people must first become aware of their shadow and the ways it operates in their lives. Without this awareness, we remain stuck in self-sabotage, unable to progress, despite our best intentions. So why is it that some people seem to break through the resistance, while others remain stuck? Jung would say that the difference lies in how deeply we are willing to confront our shadow. Those who succeed in overcoming their inner resistance are not necessarily stronger or more disciplined. They are simply more willing to face their fears. This process of self-confrontation requires an honest, often painful, exploration of the parts of ourselves that we would rather ignore. It means asking difficult questions like, what am I really afraid of? And what does my resistance protect me from? Many people, when confronted with this truth, may resist even further. They might convince themselves that they're just not disciplined enough or that they don't have the willpower to change. But in reality, these thoughts are just another form of the shadow, trying to keep them comfortable. It's easier to stay stuck in the cycle of self-criticism and inaction than to confront the fears and discomfort that come with real change. Jung believed that the only way to break free from this cycle is through awareness and integration of the shadow. It's about making the unconscious conscious. When you shine a light on the hidden parts of yourself, they lose their power over you. Once you become aware of your shadow and its influence, you can begin to make different choices. Rather than being ruled by fear, you can take small, consistent actions that move you toward your goals, no matter how uncomfortable they might feel at first. For example, if someone is trying to write a book but continually avoids sitting down to write, they might ask themselves, what am I really afraid of? The answer might be something like, I'm afraid that people won't like what I write, or I'm afraid of being judged for my work. Once these fears are acknowledged, the person can begin to take small steps to work through them. Instead of aiming to write an entire chapter, They might start by writing a single paragraph or even a few sentences. These small, honest actions allow them to confront their shadow gradually, loosening its grip over time. This process of facing the shadow doesn't happen overnight, and it's not always easy. But as Jung believed, it's the only path to lasting change. By taking small actions and making the unconscious conscious, people can begin to move past their self-sabotaging behaviors and create the life they've always dreamed of. In conclusion, the struggle between ambition and the shadow is something we all face, whether we recognize it or not. The shadow is not something to be feared, but understood. Once we face it, we can begin to change the patterns that have kept us stuck for so long. By becoming more self-aware, taking small actions, and working with the shadow rather than against it, we can break free from the cycle of ambition and stagnation and turn our dreams into reality. When we talk about laziness, most people often think of it as a flaw in someone's personality or a lack of willpower. We label ourselves as lazy when we can't seem to get started on something important, even though we know we should. Society tends to treat this as a simple problem of motivation or discipline, suggesting that if we just tried harder, we would achieve the results we desire. But Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist, offered a much deeper explanation for why this happens. According to Jung, laziness is not a personality flaw, nor is it merely a matter of not wanting to do something. Instead, what we call laziness is actually a defense mechanism that originates from our subconscious mind. Jung coined the term the shadow to describe this hidden part of the psyche, which houses everything we try to suppress or deny about ourselves. The shadow is an essential concept in Jungian psychology. It includes all the aspects of ourselves that we are unwilling or unable to confront. These can be parts of our personality that we find undesirable, like feelings of anger, jealousy, or selfishness, as well as deeper emotions like fear, guilt, or shame. Often, the shadow also contains unresolved emotional baggage from past experiences that we've pushed aside in order to maintain a sense of control or safety. However, by repressing these feelings, we don't eliminate them. Instead, they accumulate in the shadow, growing stronger and more influential over time. When we attempt to take on new challenges or pursue goals that require us to stretch beyond our comfort zones, the shadow responds by pulling us back. The defense mechanism of the shadow is activated when we step into territory that feels unsafe or unfamiliar. Whenever we set a goal that challenges our current identity or forces us to take risks, the shadow tries to protect us from what it perceives as a threat. It does so in ways that often seem to be unrelated to the situation at hand. For example, instead of allowing us to move forward with our goals, the shadow generates distractions, excuses, and rationalizations to prevent us from taking action. These distractions may manifest as feelings of fatigue, anxiety, or frustration. We might suddenly feel the urge to clean the house, watch TV, or check social media at the very moment we know we should be working toward our goals. This resistance isn't laziness. It's the shadow's attempt to keep us in our comfort zone, where things are familiar and predictable. It doesn't want us to venture out into unknown territory, because that's where change happens, and change can be uncomfortable and uncertain. The shadow thrives on maintaining the status quo, and it will do whatever it takes to keep us stuck in our existing patterns. So, when we find ourselves procrastinating or avoiding important tasks, it's often not because we lack the motivation or the discipline, but because the shadow is creating psychological barriers that stop us from acting. Take, for example, the story of someone who dreams of starting a business. This person is passionate about the idea and has spent countless hours imagining what success could look like. They're motivated, and they know they have the skills and potential to succeed. Yet, every time they sit down to work on their business plan or take action toward their goal, they feel an overwhelming sense of doubt. They begin thinking, what if I fail? Or what if people laugh at me? The shadow in their mind is playing on their deepest fears of failure, rejection, and embarrassment. These fears create a mental block that prevents them from taking any meaningful steps toward their goal. even though they desperately want to succeed. In this case, the individual shadow has activated its defense mechanism. The fear of failure and judgment is so powerful that it stops them in their tracks. The shadow's defense system works by creating a psychological barrier that makes it feel easier to avoid taking risks and confronting these uncomfortable feelings. Instead of moving forward with their business idea, they might delay the process by telling themselves, "I'll work on it later," or "I need more time to prepare." These excuses become a form of procrastination, but they're not rooted in laziness. They're rooted in fear and self-preservation. The shadow is not trying to sabotage the individual's success, it's simply trying to protect them from potential emotional pain. It's trying to keep them safe by preventing them from stepping outside their comfort zone. But the irony is that while the shadow is trying to protect us, it's actually limiting our potential. By holding us back from pursuing our dreams, it keeps us trapped in the very patterns that make us unhappy and unfulfilled. The more we listen to the shadow, the more entrenched these patterns become, and the harder it becomes to break free. As Jung pointed out, the shadow is not evil or malicious. It's simply a part of our psyche that is trying to keep us safe by preventing us from facing uncomfortable truths about ourselves. However, this protection comes at a cost. By avoiding discomfort and change, we also avoid growth and transformation. Another example that illustrates how the shadow works involves someone trying to lose weight and adopt a healthier lifestyle. This person might start off with high hopes, envisioning themselves becoming fitter and healthier, perhaps even imagining the sense of pride they would feel upon reaching their goal. But as soon as they try to implement the necessary changes, cutting out unhealthy foods, exercising regularly, or changing their routine, their shadow begins to protest. It starts creating excuses, telling them that they're too tired to work out or that they deserve a cheat day. The shadow might even convince them that they should relax today and start fresh tomorrow. These thoughts are not due to laziness, but are defense mechanisms designed to protect the person from the discomfort of change. The shadow thrives on avoiding change because change often involves confronting deeper fears or unresolved emotional issues. In the case of someone trying to lose weight, the shadow might be trying to protect them from feelings of inadequacy, fear of failure, or even shame about their current appearance. These feelings are uncomfortable, and the shadow attempts to shield them by keeping the person in their current state one that feels familiar, even if it's unhealthy or unfulfilling. This idea of the shadow being a defense mechanism helps explain why many people struggle with breaking bad habits or making lasting changes in their lives. The resistance they feel is not just a simple lack of motivation. It's the shadow's way of protecting them from emotional pain, fear, or discomfort. As Jung suggested, until we make the unconscious conscious, it will continue to direct our lives, often in ways that feel frustrating or limiting. Understanding that laziness is not a personal flaw, but a defense mechanism can be incredibly liberating. It allows us to shift our perspective from self-blame to self-compassion. Instead of berating ourselves for not doing something, we can begin to recognize the deeper psychological forces at play. By acknowledging the shadow and its role in our lives, we can start to dismantle the barriers it has created and take steps toward personal growth and transformation. However, this process requires us to face our fears and discomfort head-on, rather than avoiding them. In conclusion, laziness is not an inherent flaw or a result of lack of willpower. It is a defense mechanism created by the shadow to protect us from discomfort, fear, and emotional pain. By understanding the role of the shadow in our lives, we can begin to take conscious steps toward overcoming procrastination and self-sabotage. Rather than labeling ourselves as lazy, we can ask ourselves what the shadow is protecting us from and begin the work of confronting it, one small step at a time. The more we face our fears, the more we weaken the shadow's grip, and the more empowered we become to take meaningful action toward our goals. The internal conflict between ambition and the shadow is a central struggle that many people experience, whether they're conscious of it or not. Ambition is a powerful force. It drives us to set lofty goals, chase after success, and envision a better future. But ambition also has an unwelcome adversary, our shadow. A part of the psyche that works to keep us within the boundaries of what's familiar, comfortable, and safe. As we push for more, as we aim to grow and change, the shadow responds with resistance. This conflict is not merely about procrastination or laziness. It's about psychological forces that are rooted in deep-seated fears, insecurities, and unresolved emotional issues. The moment we step into the realm of ambition, when we set goals that require effort, risk, and growth, the shadow springs into action. Jung believed that the larger the ambition, the more powerful the shadow becomes. Each time we stretch beyond what we've known, the shadow perceives this as a threat to our established, predictable life. And its primary job is to prevent us from taking those risks. The shadow works by creating mental barriers, distractions, and feelings of doubt, making it harder for us to move forward. It seeks to keep us stuck in a safe zone, even if that zone no longer serves our highest good. This internal struggle often manifests in very familiar ways. We set goals, whether it's to lose weight, write a book, start a business, or become healthier, but as soon as it's time to act, we face an invisible force that seems to pull us back. We suddenly feel tired, distracted, or uncertain. We make excuses. I'll start tomorrow. I'm too tired to go for a run. I need more time to prepare. These excuses may seem like harmless justifications, but in reality, they are manifestations of the shadow working behind the scenes to keep us from moving forward. Take the example of someone who sets a goal to get in shape. On the surface, the goal is simple. They want to lose weight, feel better, and improve their health. The ambition to get fit is there, and the motivation is strong at first. But when it comes time to take action, the shadow steps in. The person feels an overwhelming sense of fatigue or lethargy, even if they have just woken up. They begin to think, maybe I'm too tired today, or I'll go tomorrow when I feel better. The shadow tricks the mind into thinking that rest is more important than progress. And as a result, the person stays stuck in their comfort zone, avoiding the discomfort of exertion and change. This is where the real tug of war happens: ambition on one side, the shadow on the other. The ambition urges the individual to act, to take steps toward their goal. But the shadow pulls them back with excuses, self-doubt, and distractions. The shadow whispers, "You don't really need to do this now," or "It's too late. You can always start tomorrow." These messages are not random. They're deeply ingrained survival mechanisms that stem from fears of failure, inadequacy, or even fear of success. The shadow doesn't want the person to face the discomfort and uncertainty that comes with change, and so it uses whatever means necessary to prevent action. The shadow's role is to maintain the status quo, and the moment we aim for something bigger, it perceives that as a risk. This risk is often not based on any real threat, but on the emotional discomfort of stepping into the unknown. The unknown can feel terrifying because it disrupts the safety of the familiar. For example, a person who has spent years feeling stuck in a sedentary lifestyle might feel anxiety at the thought of working out, not because working out is dangerous, but because it represents a change that requires a shift in identity. The person's old self, the one who avoids exercise and prefers comfort, is in conflict with a new version of themselves that wants to be fit and healthy. Jung's theory suggests that the bigger your goals, the more powerful the shadow becomes. Ambition calls us to grow, to take risks, and to expand our sense of self. But as we grow, we often face a deeper resistance. The resistance is not just from external factors like time or resources. It's an internal battle between who we are and who we are trying to become. Every step toward growth feels like a direct challenge to our identity, and the shadow fights back, attempting to preserve the old, comfortable version of ourselves. This tug of war is not limited to big, life-changing goals. Even smaller, everyday ambitions are met with resistance from the shadow. Consider the simple task of writing a blog post or starting a small project. At first, the idea excites you. You can imagine the end result and the motivation is there. But when it comes time to start, you find yourself distracted. Maybe you start cleaning the house or scrolling through social media. You justify it to yourself by saying, "I need to organize my space before I can focus." In this case, the shadow is using procrastination as a way to keep you from acting on your goal. The procrastination feels harmless. After all, you're organizing, right? But it's just a tactic of avoidance, a way to delay the discomfort of doing something new or unfamiliar. The more we resist the tug of war between ambition and the shadow, the more entrenched we become in our patterns. Each time we allow the shadow to win, whether by procrastinating, avoiding discomfort, or convincing ourselves that we're too tired or too busy, we reinforce the cycle of inaction. And with each failure to take action, the shadow becomes stronger, feeding on the self-doubt and frustration that follows. The more we tell ourselves that we can't do something, the more we believe it. This is why ambition alone isn't enough to overcome the shadow. Ambition without self-awareness and confrontation with the shadow is like trying to run a marathon without ever leaving the starting line. We can set goals, plan, and get excited, but until we understand the internal resistance that holds us back, we will never truly break free from it. To truly overcome this internal conflict, we need to understand what the shadow is protecting us from. Often, the resistance is not a matter of laziness or lack of discipline. It's about the emotional pain, fear of judgment, or fear of failure that comes with growth. The shadow is trying to protect us from these uncomfortable feelings, but in doing so, it keeps us locked in the same patterns that hold us back. The key to overcoming the tug of war between ambition and the shadow is to recognize the shadow's influence and confront it directly, rather than continuing to fight against ourselves. We can begin to make small, deliberate actions that move us toward our goals. These actions don't have to be big or dramatic. They can be as simple as writing a few sentences, taking a walk, or making one phone call. The point is to start and to keep going despite the shadow's attempts to keep us comfortable. When we begin to take small steps, we start to dismantle the shadow's power over us. Every time we act in the face of resistance, we weaken the hold the shadow has on us. Over time, these small steps add up, and what once felt like an impossible goal becomes a reality. The key is not to wait for the motivation to magically appear, but to take action despite the resistance. With each step, we begin to break the cycle of procrastination and self-doubt, and the shadow loses its grip. To truly win the battle between ambition and the shadow, we need to understand that the shadow is not our enemy. It is simply a part of our psyche that is trying to protect us from perceived dangers. Once we make peace with the shadow, we can move forward, not by fighting against it, but by acknowledging its presence and taking action in spite of it. The more we show up for our goals, the more we weaken the shadow's influence, and the more we create space for our true potential to unfold. The work of confronting the shadow is not an easy task, nor is it something that can be bypassed with a simple motivational speech or a trendy productivity hack. Carl Jung's philosophy teaches us that we cannot out-hustle parts of ourselves that we refuse to acknowledge or confront. These parts of us, our deepest fears, insecurities, and doubts exist in the unconscious realm of our minds, and their influence is far more powerful than we might realize. We may try to push through them by working harder or trying new tactics, but until we bring these fears into conscious awareness, they will continue to hold us back in ways we don't fully understand. The shadow is a complex concept in Jungian psychology. It represents the parts of ourselves that we often refuse to face: our emotional wounds, our suppressed desires, and the traits we find unacceptable or uncomfortable. These aspects are repressed because they are perceived as dangerous or socially undesirable, yet they remain a powerful influence on our behavior and decisions. The shadow is not inherently bad, but it can become a destructive force when left unexamined. To confront, it means to bring those hidden, uncomfortable parts of ourselves into the light of consciousness. This process is crucial for personal growth. It's the only way to free ourselves from the unconscious patterns that hold us back. When we set out to make a big change in our lives, the shadow inevitably rises to the surface. This could happen when we embark on a new career path, attempt to lose weight, or try to build a new habit. The initial excitement is often accompanied by a burst of motivation, but as soon as the reality of the effort sets in, the shadow reacts. It doesn't want us to change because change means stepping outside of the comfort zone we've created, and that's inherently risky. The shadow's job is to keep us safe, to protect us from the uncertainty and pain that come with personal transformation. But the truth is that the shadow's protective mechanisms, though they may have served us well in the past, often become more harmful than helpful. The more we resist facing our fears and doubts, the more powerful the shadow becomes. It can create excuses, distractions, and feelings of self-doubt that keep us from taking action. These behaviors are often mistaken for laziness or lack of discipline, but they are, in fact, the shadow's defense mechanisms. To truly move forward, we must address these internal forces head-on. One of the most important realizations in the process of confronting the shadow is understanding that we cannot out-hustle these internal fears. The idea that we can simply work harder, push through, or ignore our emotional resistance is a misconception. No matter how much we try to outsmart or outwork our shadow, it will continue to undermine us as long as we avoid confronting it. It's not enough to try harder or adopt a new productivity method. Real change comes when we take the time to reflect on what's actually holding us back. For example, take someone who is working to build a business. They may have a great idea, a solid plan, and the drive to succeed, yet every time they sit down to work, they feel an overwhelming sense of anxiety or fear. They procrastinate, telling themselves that they need more time to plan or that they're not ready. These are not simply excuses. They are manifestations of a shadow. The shadow is using fear of failure or fear of judgment to prevent them from taking the necessary steps toward their goal. The key to overcoming this resistance is not to push harder, but to confront the underlying fears that are creating this procrastination. This is where self-awareness comes into play. The real work begins when we take a step back and become aware of what is happening inside our minds. Self-awareness is the foundation of the process of transformation. Without it, we continue to act out of unconscious patterns, never understanding the true reasons behind our actions or inactions. Self-awareness is the tool we use to bring our unconscious fears into the light and begin to dismantle them. When we recognize that the fears we have are often exaggerated and not grounded in reality, we can start to take action in spite of them. In my own life, I've experienced this process of confronting the shadow. Every time I've tried to make a significant change, whether it was starting a new project, pursuing a career shift, or even embarking on a personal growth journey, I've been confronted with my own shadow. There's always a moment of resistance, a feeling of self-doubt, and an overwhelming urge to avoid the discomfort that comes with change. But it's only when I stop and ask myself, what is this resistance really protecting me from, that I begin to break through. I realize that my shadow is trying to protect me from the fear of failure, the fear of judgment, or the fear of being vulnerable. Once I can identify these fears, I'm able to move past them and take the next step forward. Confronting the shadow doesn't mean eliminating these fears or pretending they don't exist. It means acknowledging them, understanding their origins, and choosing to act in spite of them. It means recognizing that our fears are not necessarily based on reality, but are often the result of past experiences or conditioning. When we shine the light of self-awareness on these fears, they lose their power over us. Instead of avoiding the discomfort that comes with change, we can lean into it and use it as a catalyst for growth. An important part of this process is learning to differentiate between what is real and what is imagined. Our minds are incredibly powerful, and a shadow can convince us that the risks we face are far greater than they really are. The fear of failure, for example, can seem paralyzing, but in many cases, It is based on past experiences or societal expectations that are no longer relevant to our current situation. By confronting the shadow, we can begin to see these fears for what they truly are: unfounded and exaggerated. For instance, a person who wants to pursue a career in the arts may have dreams of becoming a writer, artist, or musician, but the shadow may present fears such as, "I'm not good enough," or "I'll never make it." These thoughts might prevent them from even trying, as they imagine the pain of failure to be too great to bear. However, when they confront the shadow, when they recognize that these fears stem from their past experiences or societal conditioning, they can begin to take small, courageous steps toward their goal. They can start writing, drawing, or performing without worrying about perfection or approval, knowing that failure is not a reflection of their worth, but simply a part of the process of growth. Confronting the shadow requires radical self-honesty. It's not enough to simply acknowledge our fears. We must be willing to face them head-on. This might feel uncomfortable at first, and it may bring up feelings of vulnerability, shame, or guilt. But by being honest with ourselves, we create the space for true transformation. It's about acknowledging the parts of ourselves that we've been avoiding and accepting them without judgment. One of the most difficult parts of confronting the shadow is dealing with the resistance that arises when we try to change. The shadow is not easily defeated, and it will continue to create obstacles, both external and internal, to keep us from moving forward. But each time we take a small, deliberate step toward our goal, we weaken the shadow's influence. Each time we choose to act in spite of our fears, we reclaim our power and take back control of our lives. The real work begins when we stop fighting against ourselves and start working with the shadow. Instead of trying to suppress or ignore our fears, we can use them as a tool for growth. We can learn to recognize the patterns that the shadow creates and take conscious steps to move beyond them. It's not about eliminating the shadow or pretending it doesn't exist. It's about integrating it into our lives in a way that empowers us rather than holds us back. In the end, confronting the shadow is not a one-time event, but an ongoing process. Every time we face our fears and take action despite them, we grow stronger. The more we confront our shadow, the more we can move toward our goals without being held back by the internal resistance that once controlled us. By developing self-awareness, accepting our fears, and taking small actions in spite of them, we can begin to break free from the cycle of self-sabotage and create the life we truly desire. The concept of taking small steps as a path to transformation is not only essential in the context of Carl Jung's psychological framework, but also in the broader understanding of how change works in real life. Many people fall into the trap of believing that meaningful transformation requires massive, sweeping changes all at once. This belief often leads to frustration and disappointment, as large-scale changes are difficult to implement and sustain. Jung, however, argued that real transformation doesn't come from making dramatic shifts overnight. Rather, it comes from consistent, small steps that accumulate over time. In his view, real change is a gradual process. It's easy to fall into the trap of wanting instant results, especially in a world that values quick fixes and fast outcomes. But transformation is a much slower, more deliberate process. It requires patience and an ongoing commitment to small, conscious actions that align with our long-term goals. The beauty of small steps is that they are manageable. They don't require overwhelming amounts of energy or commitment up front, and they allow us to build momentum over time. As we take consistent action, we begin to weaken the grip that the shadow has on us. The shadow, as described by Jung, is that part of the unconscious mind that holds our fears, insecurities, and past emotional baggage. Every time we make a big goal or try to step outside our comfort zone, the shadow pushes back. It creates resistance, often in the form of procrastination, self-doubt, or distractions. These feelings can be overwhelming, and they can stop us from moving forward. However, when we begin with small, manageable actions, we're not directly confronting the overwhelming force of the shadow. Instead, we begin to chisel away at its influence one step at a time. One of the reasons small actions are so powerful is that they allow us to bypass the overwhelming fear and resistance that can come with making a big change. For instance, if someone wants to write a book, the idea of sitting down to write 100,000 words can be daunting. The size of the task alone can feel paralyzing. But if instead of focusing on the book as a whole, the person starts with one small, manageable action, say, writing a single paragraph, suddenly the task feels much more achievable. The first step doesn't require perfection. It just requires action. By taking that initial step, the individual starts to build momentum and create a sense of progress, which gradually weakens the hold of procrastination and self-doubt. The act of breaking large goals into smaller, more achievable steps is a strategy that's rooted in psychological research and has been proven effective in overcoming procrastination and resistance. In fact, many productivity experts emphasize the importance of breaking tasks into smaller pieces to make them feel less intimidating. When we take a small action, we don't have to confront all the fears and doubts that arise when we think about the entire project. Instead, we focus on the immediate next step, which is often much more manageable. For example, consider someone who wants to get healthier by exercising regularly. The goal may seem overwhelming at first. Imagine going from a sedentary lifestyle to a routine of daily workouts. The thought of committing to a rigorous exercise plan can trigger resistance, anxiety, and self-doubt. However, if the person starts with just a 10-minute walk each day, the task becomes less daunting. Over time, as they continue taking this small action consistently, the resistance from the shadow begins to soften. The person builds confidence in their ability to follow through, and the habit becomes more ingrained. The momentum they build with each small step eventually leads to bigger, more significant changes. The key to this process is consistency. Small actions, when done regularly, compound over time. Just as small drops of water can eventually carve out a canyon, small, consistent actions can gradually lead to transformative change. Each step you take is a victory against the shadow, a way to prove to yourself that you are capable of progress. When we face resistance, the tendency is to want to give up or take a break, thinking that we'll just tackle everything all at once later. But Jung emphasized that change doesn't work that way. Transformation is the result of cumulative, consistent effort, not sporadic bursts of activity. Another reason small steps are effective is that they allow us to track our progress. Often, when we make drastic changes, the results can be slow and hard to see. This can be discouraging, especially when we expect immediate rewards. Small steps, on the other hand, offer quick wins. Each small action is measurable, and each victory, no matter how small, gives us a sense of accomplishment. This positive reinforcement helps to keep us motivated, even when the larger goal still feels distant. By tracking progress, we can see that we are, in fact, moving forward, even if it feels slow. Let's say someone sets a goal to declutter their entire home. The idea of going through years' worth of belongings and organizing them can feel overwhelming. The sheer size of the task makes it easy to put off indefinitely. But if they break the task down into small actions like organizing one drawer or closet per day, the task becomes more manageable. At the end of each day, they can see the tangible progress they've made. Even if they haven't decluttered the entire house, they've made a meaningful impact. And that small success motivates them to continue the process. The idea of taking small steps also applies to the process of confronting the shadow. The shadow is often rooted in deep fears, insecurities, or emotional wounds that have accumulated over time. Confronting the shadow can feel daunting because it requires us to face uncomfortable truths about ourselves. But we don't have to confront everything all at once. Instead, we can take small, honest actions to bring the unconscious into the conscious. For instance, if someone is struggling with a fear of failure, they don't have to overcome it all at once. Instead, they can start by acknowledging the fear in small, manageable doses. Perhaps they can set a small goal, like sending an email or having a difficult conversation, and see what happens. Over time, these small confrontations with the shadow weaken its power over them. This approach is especially effective because it prevents us from becoming overwhelmed by the enormity of the task. Change is a process, not an event. And by focusing on one small action at a time, we can make it feel less intimidating and more achievable. As we continue to take small steps, the resistance from the shadow weakens, and we begin to see the results of our efforts. The key is to keep going, even when it feels like we're not making much progress. Each small step is a victory, and the accumulation of those victories over time leads to meaningful transformation. A final example of the power of small steps can be seen in someone learning a new skill. Suppose someone wants to learn a new language, like Spanish. The idea of becoming fluent can seem impossible at first, especially if they've never studied the language before. The shadow might create feelings of inadequacy, self-doubt, or frustration. However, if they break the task down into small, manageable actions like learning 5 new words a day or practicing for 10 minutes each morning, the task becomes much more achievable. Over time, those small actions add up, and before long, the person is making significant progress. They may not be fluent overnight, but they're consistently moving toward their goal. The process of taking small steps is not about rushing or forcing change. It's about creating a sustainable path toward transformation, one action at a time. The shadow can be a powerful force, but it loses its grip when we consistently show up, even in small ways. Transformation doesn't require grand gestures, it requires persistence, self-awareness, and a willingness to take small actions that lead us toward our goals. By breaking big goals into smaller, manageable steps, we can overcome resistance, build momentum, and ultimately create the lasting change we desire. True change, as Carl Jung emphasized, is not about ignoring the parts of ourselves that we dislike or fear, but about confronting them and integrating them into our conscious awareness. The final step in breaking free from the cycle of procrastination, self-doubt, and stagnation is learning to embrace both our ambitions and our shadows. Jung's wisdom teaches us that once we stop resisting the deeper forces within us, our fears, insecurities, and doubts, and begin to make them conscious, we can start to make real progress in achieving our goals. This is not a simple, one-time fix. It's a continuous process of radical self-honesty and acceptance. The shadow, which Jung defines as the part of the unconscious mind that holds everything we try to repress, our fears, inadequacies, and undesirable traits, often holds us back more powerfully than we realize. It doesn't just lie dormant. It works actively behind the scenes, influencing our thoughts, actions, and decisions in subtle, yet significant ways. For example, when we try to take a big step toward a new goal, whether it's pursuing a career change, losing weight, or starting a new relationship, the shadow can emerge as resistance. We might find ourselves procrastinating, making excuses, or succumbing to self-doubt. This resistance is not an indication of laziness, weakness, or a lack of discipline. It's the shadow at work, trying to protect us from the discomfort of change. However, as Jung suggested, fighting against this resistance or trying to suppress only strengthens the hold the shadow has over us. True transformation begins when we stop fighting the parts of ourselves we fear and begin to accept them. This process involves looking at the shadow, directly acknowledging the parts of ourselves we'd rather ignore, and making peace with them. Only then can we begin to move forward in a meaningful way. When we embrace change, we're not just changing external circumstances. We are transforming internally. We are acknowledging that the fears and doubts we carry are not inherently destructive, but are part of the process of growth. Change, after all, is inherently uncomfortable. It forces us to step out of our comfort zones and confront parts of ourselves that we may have avoided for years. But rather than seeing this discomfort as a threat, we can start to see it as an opportunity for growth. This shift in perspective is one of the most powerful aspects of Jung's work. He showed us that change doesn't happen through force or willpower alone. It happens when we make the unconscious conscious and stop avoiding the parts of ourselves that make us feel vulnerable. In the context of personal transformation, embracing change means taking ownership of the fears that hold us back and using them as a source of strength. For instance, if someone is afraid of failure, they might be tempted to avoid taking risks altogether. But if they can face this fear, understand where it comes from, and accept that failure is a natural part of the growth process, they can start to see failure as a stepping stone rather than an obstacle. This mindset shift is crucial for anyone who wants to break free from the cycle of inaction and finally achieve their dreams. A key part of this process is embracing radical self-honesty. It's easy to deceive ourselves into thinking that we lack the resources or willpower to change. We often tell ourselves stories about why we can't do something, convincing ourselves that the timing isn't right, or that we need more knowledge, or that we're too tired. But these are all just ways of avoiding the discomfort that comes with change. Radical self-honesty means facing these excuses head-on and recognizing them for what they are: self-imposed limitations. It means being truthful with ourselves about what is holding us back, rather than pretending that the path to transformation is harder than it actually is. For example, let's say someone wants to become more productive. They might spend hours researching productivity tips, watching motivational videos, or downloading productivity apps, but still fail to take any meaningful action. Why? Because the real issue isn't a lack of information or tools, it's the resistance created by the shadow. Perhaps they fear failure or worry that they won't be able to maintain their productivity in the long run. By acknowledging this fear and accepting that it's part of the process, they can begin to take small steps toward their goal without getting overwhelmed by the fear of not being perfect. Once we become honest with ourselves, we can begin to take consistent action. Real transformation requires consistency, not perfection. It's not about taking massive leaps all at once, but about committing to small, intentional actions every day. This is where the true work begins. It's easy to make a big plan or set an ambitious goal, but it's much harder to stick with it over time, especially when the shadow starts to push back. The key to overcoming this resistance is consistency. By taking small, deliberate actions every day, we begin to weaken the grip that the shadow has on us. As we consistently show up for ourselves, despite the fear or doubt, we start to make progress however small it may seem at first. For instance, if someone wants to write a book, they don't need to write a whole chapter every day. The goal might be to write just one paragraph a day. That might not seem like much, but over time, those paragraphs add up, and eventually, the book is written. The shadow may resist, telling them that they aren't good enough or that the book will never be successful. But by continuing to write just one paragraph each day, they're taking control of their destiny. Consistency in the face of resistance is one of the most powerful tools for transformation. It's also important to track your progress along the way. When we take small steps consistently, it can sometimes feel like we're not making much progress. This is especially true when the changes we're trying to make are deeply ingrained habits or patterns of behavior. Tracking progress is a way to remind ourselves that we are moving forward, even when it doesn't feel like it. This can be as simple as keeping a journal or writing down our achievements each day. By tracking our progress, we can see how far we've come and build momentum. This sense of progress is vital for staying motivated, as it reinforces the idea that change is possible, even when it feels slow. As we continue to take small, consistent actions, the resistance from the shadow begins to soften. It might not disappear entirely, but becomes less powerful over time. The more we show up for ourselves, the more we prove to our unconscious mind that change is possible and that we are capable of handling the discomfort that comes with it. The shadow, which once seemed like an insurmountable obstacle, begins to lose its grip. The final step in this journey is not just about taking small steps, but about embracing the process as a whole. Change doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen without setbacks. There will be times when the shadow resurfaces and creates resistance, but that's part of the process. Instead of getting discouraged, we can embrace the challenges as opportunities for growth. Every time we face resistance and continue to move forward, we weaken the shadow's hold and take another step toward transformation. At the end of the day, real change is not about grand gestures or instant success. It's about consistent, intentional action, paired with radical self-honesty and a willingness to confront the fears and doubts that hold us back. It's about making the unconscious conscious, and in doing so, turning our dreams into reality. By embracing both our ambitions and our shadows, we can transform our lives, one small step at a time. Wow, what an incredible journey we've been on today. We've uncovered how the shadow, that hidden part of ourselves, affects our ability to change, and how our deepest fears and doubts can create resistance when we try to pursue our goals. By confronting the shadow and bringing the unconscious to the surface, we not only understand why we resist change, but also gain the power to take action and make meaningful progress toward our dreams. Remember, transformation doesn't come from forcing drastic change all at once. It comes from taking small, consistent steps, addressing the fears that hold us back, and showing up every day with self-awareness and honesty. It's a process that takes time, but the more we embrace it, the more we weaken the shadow's grip and the closer we get to achieving our goals. I hope today's video has given you the tools and insights you need to begin facing your own shadow and taking those small steps toward lasting transformation. Don't be afraid to confront your fears. They're the key to unlocking your true potential. Before you go, don't forget to hit that like button if you found value in this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear this message. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel for more content on personal growth, self-awareness, and making your dreams a reality. Your support means the world to me. And if you'd like to show extra appreciation, please consider donating a super thanks. Your contributions help me keep creating content that can make a difference in people's lives. So, what small action will you take today to confront your shadow and move one step closer to your goals? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Let's support each other on this journey of growth and transformation. Remember, change is possible, and you have the power to shape your own story. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Keep taking those small steps and keep moving forward.